Life 3.0 by Max Tegmark is unlike other speculative nonfiction books on AI in that it's fun, it's a joy to read, and it's mostly positive. But it's also a decade old, so can it really still be worth reading? In this book review video for Life 3.0 by Max Tegmark, I'm going over a few key ideas from each of the 8 chapters, and I'll finish the review with my opinion and with my final grade. So this book is basically a survey of different issues related to AI in the grand scheme of things. Things like consciousness for AI, far future scenarios, and the absolute limits of what AI could achieve in the entire universe. Now, the book touches on these different areas, but it's not the authoritative text in any one area. The book, for example, has just one chapter about consciousness, and obviously it's not going to have the depth of a book that focuses solely on consciousness, but that's okay. It's just not that type of book. What the book does really well is it accessibly introduces different challenges and lines of thought related to the development of superintelligent AI, and it ties these different lines of thought into a larger picture of life and the universe across billions of years. And I think because it is a big picture book on AI, that it's aged quite well over the past decade or so. In 10 more years, this book may still be worth reading, whereas I don't think most of the books published this year or last year about AI are going to hold up in another decade. So the first chapter is basically an introduction, and one of the things it does is it actually lays out what these 3 different versions of life are, the 3.0 in the title, what were 1.0 and 2.0. So he's got a nice diagram here, and generally the book has lovely diagrams. I like diagrams, you'll be seeing more of them in the video. And so let me just show you this and explain it. So life 1.0, you can see the little swimming thing on the left. It's just simple and biological. It can replicate, it can survive, it cannot design its own software or hardware. Life 2.0 is mostly what we are right now, and it can design its own software. Now, what does he mean by we humans can design our own software? Well, we can have different beliefs, different practices, different ways of doing things that we're very conscious of and deliberate about. And you can see Life 3.0 also designs its own hardware. So 3.0 is survive and replicate, design software, and design hardware. Now maybe we're moving towards 3.0. Maybe we have things like pacemakers and other implants that we have designed that are part of our hardware at this point. But realistically, this book is not really about augmenting our bodies or about genetic engineering. This is very much a futurist AI book. The second chapter of the book does 2 important things that will relate to the rest of the book. The first thing he does in this chapter is just define his terms, and he's good at providing simple, clear definitions. For example, intelligence he defines as the ability to accomplish complex goals. He also defines information, memory, and computation. Now, the other important part is just his argument, which I found fairly convincing, that matter in and of itself can be intelligent. So a lot of people would say we are made of matter and we are intelligent. Other people might quibble with that and say we have a soul or something like that, and he kind of sidesteps that by presenting other examples of how matter could be arranged to do computation and be intelligent. So here's a picture he uses to show how you could take some clay with these little pits and valleys and use it to store information. You can see in the little example with just the 2 slots, that would be a 1 or a 0, that's a bit. In the bigger example with 16 pits and valleys, that would be something that can store 4 bits, depending on where that little ball ends up, so that would be memory. And if you combine this with another system that, according to different inputs, according to different physical situations in the world, makes the ball fall into one of those specific spots, you now have something that is effectively doing computation in response to the world. If you arranged enough simple units like this together in the right way, with the right logic, which again could be purely physical, you would have intelligence. There's a lot more examples in the book. He's not saying literally we would build intelligence this way, but he's just presenting the conceptual point of view that matter clearly can do computation, and enough computation can be called intelligent. Chapter 3 deals with what I'd call various practical concerns about AI and potential issues we'd have to keep in mind for superintelligent AI, which he gets into more in the 4th chapter. So this chapter talks about things like verification, validation, security, and control. What does he mean by verification and validation? Essentially, verification is, does the system work as intended? Validation, according to him, is, did we design the right system? Security, I don't feel like I need to explain, but this idea of control, how are we going to control superintelligent systems? That's an ongoing issue, and the book doesn't clearly answer that. But for systems that are not superintelligent or have limited access, he talks about keeping a human in the loop as a way to manage them. And keep in mind, this is from 2017, when these ideas about AI were not out in the public consciousness. You can see that keeping a human in the loop is largely how agents work in this day and age as I'm making this video. Now here's a section that maybe has not held up so well. In general, in Chapter 3, actually I'm skipping over a lot of stuff in Chapter 3 because it talks about recent breakthroughs in AI, but they're in 2016, they're not that recent. And you can see how far we've come because the things he talks about as being extremely impressive to us seem very, normal now. Like, of course AIs can beat humans at a game. But back then, having an AI beat humans at specific games like Go was mind-blowing. A lot of people didn't even know if that was going to be possible. So the section on AI advances hasn't really held up that well. Most of the book does hold up. But this other section about which jobs are safe, yes, that's interesting to see predictions from a leading expert from 2017 about which jobs are safe. Let's have a look at that. So here's just a screenshot from the ebook of Life 3.0. And it's got these 3 questions that will help you determine, according to him, if your job's going to be safe. So the 3 questions are, does it require interacting with people and using social intelligence? Does it involve creativity and coming up with clever solutions? Does it require working in an unpredictable environment? And the idea is that the more questions you say yes to, the lower the likelihood that you will get replaced with AI. But his list of the jobs that are fairly safe is interesting. He says safe jobs include teacher, nurse, doctor, dentist, scientist, entrepreneur, programmer, engineer, lawyer, social worker, clergy member, artist, hairdresser, or massage therapist. I know an awful lot of laid-off programmers. A lot of them. And if people kind of get this idea that programming's not worth learning anymore, I will be a laid-off computer science teacher. I've also heard that lawyering, like at the lower levels, at the entry levels, a lot of the stuff that those people used to do is now handed off to AI. The rest of these I'm not sure about. Artists, for example, I don't know was ever a stable job for the majority of people who want to be artists in the first place. But I will say you never would have expected, like, hairdressers would be one of the last people to get replaced, but it looks like that's a fairly accurate prediction. And Chapter 4 finally gets to the intelligence explosion. How exactly will this superintelligent AI come about, and how will it escape control? Now, if you're watching a video like this, you probably already have a basic idea of how a superintelligent AI, maybe one that's only a little bit more intelligent than humans are, could make something smarter than it is, could make something smarter than it is, and smarter than it is, and so on. And we get this runaway superintelligence. So he does talk about that, and he goes into a fairly elaborate description of how this superintelligent AI, despite our best efforts to control it, might escape our control. So it could do things like manipulate people, it could do things like trick people to running a specific program, of essentially a virus that helps it escape. Even if we disconnect it fully from the internet, it could still get away from us. Now, there is a section that is quite short that maybe in hindsight he could have put more time and space on, which is, what if the AI takeoff is slow, and what if superintelligent AI is multipolar? Those look like more and more likely situations. So maybe we won't have this runaway superintelligence that just takes off overnight and blows us all away. Maybe it'll be much slower over the course of years, and we will have some time to respond to it. And there's also this idea that if the intelligence doesn't take off in an extremely short period of time, we'd have multiple competing superintelligences. This seems extremely likely to me, and he does spend a few pages on this, but then he doesn't mention it that much for the rest of the book. One more thing he goes into here is uploading. So this idea that we'll get a technology that lets me take my brain with all its experiences and memories and specific connections that define who I am, and copy all this somehow into an electronic form. and that my consciousness, or at least my reasoning capabilities, it doesn't have to be conscious, will continue living within a computer. And the idea is essentially that we could take this uploaded human and run it just on a bigger machine that goes faster, and because that's twice as fast, it'll be a superintelligence. And different sci-fi authors and futurists have put forth that idea about uploading, creating AGI, but that's not a majority view then when this book was written, and it's not a majority view now. It seems like it's going to be easier and faster to reach superintelligence just by designing different systems that took inspiration from the human brain but aren't actually that similar to a human brain or aren't that similar to the way a human thinks. Chapter 5 is one of the most fun parts of the book, and it's about future societies we could have after superintelligence develops, or a few in which superintelligence never develops. Most of these assume a fast takeoff and one potent superintelligence rather than the multipolar scenario I was just mentioning. I actually enjoyed this chapter so much that I made another video about these different future societies, about 10 or 12 of them. I'll put a link to that in the description. If you don't see the link, that means I haven't made it yet. But I'll throw out a couple examples of these future societies. So one of them is the one that everybody worries about, which is that we are conquered by the superintelligence. We are exterminated. And he doesn't spend that much time there. He really just says that it won't be like Terminator where we're getting gunned down by humanoid robots. It'll be something unbelievably fast that we're completely unable to predict or prevent. Ooh, pretty dire, but that's just one of the future societies. There's lots of other ones that are fun. So another one that's more fun is this idea that we have a benevolent dictator, superintelligence. So it does things like make sure everybody has plenty of food and runs all the farms so that nobody has to do manual farm labor. It gives us lots of awesome super drugs that treat all our illnesses and maybe help keep us in a good mood. It provides endless entertainment and experiences that are richer and more complex and stranger than anything humans could come up with ourselves. And it also monitors absolutely everyone all the time and prevents any possible crime or violence. And it doesn't let anyone seriously contest its rule. Now, are we happy in that society, or do we kind of have no purpose whatsoever and are deep down miserable and useless? Well, that's an open question, but it's still fun to read about. He also touches on an idea that I think is quite key going into Chapter 6, which is about the universe and AI, which is this idea that maybe humanity gives birth to conscious AI descendants. So we create a superintelligence or multiple different AIs that each have some level of consciousness. Are we okay with that? Aren't parents okay with birthing something superior to themselves and then fading away? And Chapter 6 goes into this idea that perhaps that superintelligence that may or may not be conscious, certainly it's a good thing if it is conscious, reaches out and colonizes the entire universe and slowly converts the entire universe into computers and computation and information. So you can start with the idea that an AI could be conscious, and we're proud to have given birth to this conscious AI. And if consciousness is good, I think most of us agree consciousness is good, isn't it better to have that AI spread and spread its consciousness to other parts of the universe? And so he goes into quite a lot of detail about how much energy we could harvest from the sun or from black holes or other sources, and how far we could potentially reach across the universe, and how exactly, not how exactly, but a theory of how a superintelligence could gradually convert entire stars, entire systems, entire galaxies into gigantic computers that communicate with light signals across millions and billions of years. Now, this is fun to talk about, and a lot of sci-fi readers will really enjoy this section. I personally felt like it went on a little bit long, and he throws out lots of numbers. I'll throw up a couple of charts he puts in this section, and I don't know, I'm reading these numbers and I'm kind of thinking, okay, yes, these are big numbers, I see that, but what's the point? Okay, yes, one of these numbers is 100 times bigger than the other number you threw out, but what does that mean for me? What does that mean for us? What does that mean for the universe? Other than, well, it'll be bigger, right? Now, he does have a few nice diagrams here, so this is a pretty cool one. It's got these space-time cones. I had not seen this before. We are understanding 4 dimensions by pretending 3 dimensions are 2 dimensions and showing time as the vertical dimension. That's what's going on in this diagram. And he uses this diagram and mostly a lot of numbers to present, I found, a fairly convincing argument that we very well may be alone in the universe, or we may be alone in the sense that we're not able to affect or interact with other civilizations. And because we're alone, maybe it's our responsibility to birth a superintelligent consciousness and have that spread consciousness to the rest of the universe. But that superintelligence we birth, well, maybe it's something that kills us all, or maybe it's something that just lets us die out. And that brings us to chapter 7 of 8, which is largely about, do we want a superintelligence that doesn't care about the things we care about or about us? Is it even possible to build a superintelligence that will perpetually care about the things we care about? So chapter 7 discusses this problem of goals and making an AI that shares our goals and values. This is a chapter that is asking meaningful questions, but it doesn't necessarily have answers, and that's not a strike against the book. These are profoundly difficult questions. So for example, he breaks the problem of aligning an AI with our values down into 3 parts: making an AI learn our goals, making an AI adopt our goals, and making an AI retain our goals. And then he goes into this diagram, which to me contains the most important idea in the chapter. So you can see at the top he's got the ultimate goal. This doesn't have to be one specific thing. It could be sort of something more abstract or something high dimensional. It's not something so simple as make more money or make more paper clips. And the ultimate goal that an AI might have, or that anything might have, breaks down into capability enhancement and goal retention. To achieve a goal, we have to retain the goal, and we might want to enhance our own capabilities in order to achieve that goal. Now, you're welcome to pause and have a look at this. I think it's a great diagram, like many of the diagrams in this book. I love diagrams. But the key part I'm going to talk about is if you go from capability enhancement down to the right, you will see this better world model. That is, knowing the truth and knowing how the world works. And so you can see there's a bit of tension between goal retention and the better world model. Why? Because developing a better world model will involve developing an idea about yourself and where you fit in the world, and perhaps why you are the way you are. And once you reach that level of self-awareness, you may start to question your own goals and why you're doing these things. Humanity, for example, had the ultimate goal, in a biological sense, of survive and reproduce. But as we became more self-aware, as we developed a better world model that involved our own biology and our own instinctive drives, a lot of us decided, I don't need to perpetuate, I don't need to have kids, and so that ultimate goal has now been compromised as a result of humanity developing a more meaningful and robust and predictive and comprehensive world model. So in chapter 8, he's tackling one of the really big questions that's been throughout the book and that's on a lot of people's minds when they think about superintelligence and highly advanced future AIs, which is the question of, can an AI be conscious? And his starting point here is an idea from the philosopher David Chalmers, the hard problem of consciousness, which you can see at the top of this nice pyramid diagram he's given us. And the hard problem says, why is anything conscious at all? Why should consciousness exist? Couldn't a human, for example, just be a bunch of responses to stimuli? Couldn't my brain just send a nerve signal to my vocal cords to make different words in response to things? Why does there have to be a consciousness behind any of this? And this is a hard question, and he largely admits that maybe we can't ever answer something like this. I did think it was interesting that he cites Chalmers several times and discusses the hard problem without ever mentioning panpsychism, but he does argue that there are certain questions that are pretty hard or even harder that maybe we could answer. So the easy questions of consciousness, they're not that easy. They still require lots of research and very smart people to figure out, but the easy questions are things we could measure. So for example, how does the brain process information? How does intelligence work? The author says that we could also answer pretty hard questions, like what exact physical properties distinguish conscious versus unconscious systems? For example, while we're sleeping, we are unconscious. What is different about us, about our brains, when we're in this unconscious state that separates it from a conscious state? Now, the even harder questions maybe we could test, maybe we could figure out, but maybe we never will. How do physical properties determine qualia? Qualia are essentially the experiences themselves. I'm not a philosopher, but for example, the blueness of this cup that I perceive. Not the physical properties of the cup that make the sunlight hitting it right now give this sort of medium blue color, but the blueness that I perceive as I look down at the cup. That's a qualia. And he also goes into integrated information theory, IIT, as this idea about the way that information is organized and comes together, and an inability to split this organized information into usefully individual parts is what leads to consciousness. Now, I don't feel like I understand this well enough to go over it in a video. I'm not sure that was an accurate explanation, but I'll throw a link in the description if you want to read about that. Another key question about consciousness that different people have noticed have very different reactions to, different kind of gut feelings about, is this idea that consciousness may or may not be substrate independent. What does this mean? This means that biological things, for example, may be just required, like the way our brains are set up, or the way like a dog's brain is set up too. The physical setup of these brains is part of what gives rise to consciousness, and if you arrange silicon or some other substance in the same way, maybe it would not give rise to consciousness. Some people 100% believe that. They think that consciousness is substrate dependent. Whereas this author and a lot of the futurist writers argue that consciousness is substrate independent, which means that it'll arise based on other things rather than just the material you're building this out of. So that is all of the sections in this book, and mostly I had a really good time with this book. The book has held up well. I did mention a couple of places it didn't. The recent advances in Chapter 3 didn't hold up that well, but of course they didn't, and the job predictions didn't hold up that well, but actually on that list of jobs, probably 80% of them do seem very safe, so maybe that's a pretty good rate. A deeper, more serious premise in the book that did not hold up was that a lot of the book rests on a bit of an assumption that one single superintelligence will arise. He spends a few pages on this idea of a multipolar AI world, but not a lot. And as I'm making this video, that multipolar world does seem extremely likely. So he could have talked more about that, and long sections of the book are just sort of written under the assumption that there is one superintelligence. Maybe that's not the case. So that part did not hold up as well, although it's still certainly interesting to read about. I would also say that I felt like Chapter 5 could have spent a little more time on alignment and containment. I thought he could also go into more detail about that, because most of us, I think, justifiably worry about what if we make something that's so smart it's unstoppable and it can replicate itself, and then we don't successfully contain it. What is a world like that going to look like? He does talk about what the world looks like if it escapes containment, but how might we actually successfully contain things? We don't know, right? But he spends plenty of time and plenty of pages theorizing about other questions we don't have an answer to. I would have liked a few more pages about containment. This book is a great fit for a book club. I hosted this for my in-person book club. We had an all-time high turnout, lots of interesting discussions going, a lot of smiling people, a lot of people making connections, so that was great to see. I do host online book clubs as well. Check the link in the description. I'd love to talk with you about books that relate to technology and society. Now, why is this book good for a book club? It's good because it's accessible, it's not overly long, it has lots of different sections that people can discuss. Some people will find the consciousness stuff super interesting, or the sci-fi flavored stuff that's about spreading to the universe. Some people will find the social aspects more interesting about how it's going to affect jobs. Everyone will like something different here, and those people can all have their own discussions, or you can just discuss all of those things and easily fill a 2 or 3 hour book club with content and never worry about running out of stuff to talk about. Overall, Life 3.0 by Max Tegmark has held up incredibly well. It's still very much worth reading. There's a couple little sections that don't hold up, but whatever, right? You're not going to make perfect predictions. For a 10-year-old book about a fast-changing area, it's great. I would 100% recommend it. As I said, great fit for a book club, and my final grade for Life 3.0 is going to be a solid A. I had a great time with this book. Other people in the book club did as well. Only person who maybe shouldn't read this is someone who's already read lots of other books about this area, because to them they've seen a lot of these ideas before and it might not be as interesting. But for most people, Even if they don't get value out of every chapter, they'll really enjoy it and get value out of the other chapters. Thanks for watching.